Good afternoon, AP Gov students. We're trying to zip through the last little bit of these reviews. This one is about voting, okay? Pretty much everybody in the United States who is a citizen can vote if they're 18 years old. Now, you can't vote if you're in a prison, and some states don't let their ex-felons vote, so there are some limits. But not as many as there used to be. As you know, in the early days of the United States, you had to be a landholder to vote. That went by the wayside fairly quickly, and ever since then, we've been expanding suffrage. So you need to know the amendments that talk about the ways that we have expanded suffrage. Suffrage, of course, is the right to vote. First, we have the 15th Amendment that specifically says that people of color have the right to vote. Next, we have the 17th Amendment, which is about senators, okay? It allows for the direct election of senators. Remember that prior to that, state legislatures had elected them. Next, we have the 19th Amendment, which gives women the right to vote. The 22nd Amendment, actually the 24th Amendment, which bans poll taxes, which was a barrier to the right to vote, of course. And then we have the 26th Amendment, which dropped the voting age from 21 to 18. All right? So who votes demographically? So people who are more educated are more likely to vote, as you can see in this slide. People who are older are more likely to vote, as we all know. People who are minorities are less likely to vote, except for African Americans. Women are more likely to vote than men. Married people are more likely to vote than single. Government employees are more likely to vote, interestingly enough. And these differences are cumulative, which means that if you have more than one of them, it makes you even more likely to vote. All right? Now, we should talk about models of voting behavior, okay? There are essentially four models that we talked about. One is rational choice theory, which we talked about way back in econ, actually. And rational choice theory says people make decisions based on their own best interests, okay? So that theory of voting says that people vote based on their own perceived best interest, okay? There is prospective voting, which is voting based on what you expect of the candidate in the future. Okay. There is retrospective voting, which is based on your perception of how the candidate has performed in the past. What is their record? Okay. And there is party line voting, which says that the person who is following this model will vote according to their own party. Now, voter turnout is not high. We do not have a high voter turnout in this country. What are the reasons for that? Let's go over that. Okay, why might people vote? Before we get to the low voter turnout, people usually have a couple of reasons why they might want to vote. One is out of a sense of political efficacy. They think it matters when they vote. They think their vote counts. They know it's only one, but they believe that 1 + 1 + 1 equals a lot, okay, in the end. Second reason why people vote is civic duty. They believe it's their duty as a citizen to vote, okay? Now, as for the voter turnout and why it's so low, okay, you can look at the fact that we don't have non-automatic voter registration laws. We have to actually go fill out a form or do something online to register to vote. That's changed a little bit with the Motor Voter Act that was passed in the 90s, in 93, okay, because that it requires states to allow you to register to vote when you show up at the DMV to get your driver's license or get it renewed, okay. Another significant reason for low voter turnout right now, in terms of what people are doing right now, is the requirement that you have a photo ID, a certain kind of photo ID when you show up. And we read about this and realized that this actually limits minority voting. Okay, it adversely impacts that group. Also, states are trying to put limits on absentee voting, and that makes it harder for people who have a hard time showing up on the day of voting because of how many jobs they have and that sort of thing. It's easier to mail it in. They've done a few other things, like reductions in the number of voting registration offices and hours, which have adversely impacted African Americans. Now, some more classic reasons for low voter turnout, which are less recent focus, but have, are perennial, are ongoing. First of all, Americans have to vote a lot. We have several jurisdictions, right? We have voting for federal offices, we have voting for state offices, we have voting for local offices, and though we try to combine those, that's a lot of voting, okay? We even vote a lot in a given election because we have primary elections and then we have the general election, and most places don't do that, all right? Sometimes for people, the choices haven't been distinct enough. Voting, another issue is that voting is on Tuesday, okay? It's not on a weekend when people are usually off from work, or at least hopefully are off from work, or a holiday. And some people have suggested making voting day be a holiday. Okay, so also definitely remember that voter turnout in the congressional midterm elections, that's what we call the off years, for example, what we just had in 2018. Voting is lower in those elections than it is in the general election because more people come out to vote for president. Okay, how do voters make their choices? What's the best predictor of how an individual voter will vote in an election? That is their party identification, okay? They generally vote consistent with their ideological orientation, all right, which is tied to their party identification, obviously. Now, this is happening a little less often, split ticket voting, when the person votes for candidates from different parties on the same ballot. That's more common than it used to be, than party line voting, okay? There are other things that people consider. Demographics. Demographics is a big talking point for the media with respect to the 2020 Democratic candidates because they're so much more diverse than they have been in the past. People look at candidate characteristics, personal appeal matters. And, of course, sometimes voters vote based on policy. Okay? Now, in order to vote based on policy, you have to find out what the policy choices are. You have to educate yourself enough to choose between the policies, and then you have to actually vote for the policy. Okay? It takes a little more work than some of the other methods. Okay? It's easier to vote straight party line. Okay. That's it for this topic. I'll talk to you about others later.